Keith Crawshaw. I'm chair of the Ken Hawley Collection Trust, but also deputy chair of the Sheffield Industrial Trust Museums Trust as well. Well, the Hawley Collection really derives from one individual, and his name's in the title of the trust. That's Ken Hawley. Ken Hawley was a tool shop owner in Sheffield for many years. He had a shop somewhere off the moor, which he operated for many years, but his passion for tools not only derived from the trade he was in, and it led to his many contacts in industry, but I think really he was instrumental in seeing the crafts and skills that were involved in Sheffield in making those tools. And although we call it a tool collection, it's actually a tool collection that's composed not just of the tools that were made largely in Sheffield, but also the tools that made the tools, because to make a tool you need a tool. And whilst it might sound a terribly dry subject, it's incredibly fascinating to see how the various things we use in everyday objects in the home as tools, through to things in industry, as how they were made and how in a sense they were formed. And what I think in a sense Ken was concerned about, he already knew that some of those individual skills of craftsmen were disappearing as industries closed, and some of the tools quite literally stopped being used. A good example is Sheffield was one of the largest centres of file making. Files are no longer made in the city any longer, but Ken was concerned enough to want to record those, and also not just collect the objects, but actually also create films, sound recordings of people who worked in industry and how those things were actually made and kept for posterity. Largely the collection was formed by being in his home, in various garages, sheds, and Mrs. Hawley must have been a very patient woman in a day. And Ken decided he wanted to keep it in Sheffield, and the trust was formed to actually effectively buy it from Ken at what I think was a knockdown price at the time. And Ken stayed with the collection. We not only inherited the collection, we inherited Ken with it. He was a trustee for many years until he died 3 years ago. Eventually he moved to a store just off Mapping Street by the university, and then in 2010 I and some others persuaded him to be positive about a move down to Kelham, where I thought it was an important addition to what Kelham has to offer. And the Hawley Gallery was formed through a lottery project from the Industrial Museums Trust, and for the first time we had somewhere to exhibit some of the collection as well as store it in better conditions. And we have in Kelham about 3 or 4 different locations in the stores. You only ever see about probably 5% of the collection on display at any one time, but within the stores is a goldmine of not only other tools but trade literature, pamphlets, archives, records, photographs, movies that we've got, sound recordings from a day when in fact Sheffield actually meant a lot around the world in terms of tool creation. Well, when you come into the main gallery, you'll see obviously the public display, but upstairs, which you'll turn around and look up at the mezzanine floor, we've got our main small objects store, which is on roller stacking, and it forms that upper floor. That is interesting itself as an architectural feature, because the girder work that forms that was here in this building before we moved here. It was used by the architect to actually create a mezzanine floor, and particularly in Kelham for our stores was important because the flood had also happened 3 years before we came here. So again, we've given some thought that if ever it happens again, and hopefully it won't, is that the objects are movable but are out of reach of flood water. And then off to the right hand side as you come in, we've also behind the scenes got another further extension that was built 2 or 3 years after the main gallery was built, which again is another range of our tools, garden tools, larger hammers, things down there, as well as a small workshop and an office space. But not directly in the gallery. If you go down the Little Mester Street and look at the saw shop there, that's another bit of the Hawley collection. That's our saw collection, which is both the Hawleys but also Simon Barley, who's one of our volunteers, is an avid saw collector himself, and so Simon's collection is also part of that. And then on the back of Kelham, just across the other side of the yard from us, is what is called the Sedgley Large Objects Store, and we've got a whole range of racking in there which has got some of our bigger and uncatalogued objects, as well as to the side of that there's a further store which we call the metrology store, which is where we've got fine measuring instruments, rules and measures, lathes and other things are kept in there. What Ken did, and this was unique in its time, in the mid-1960s with his 8mm cine film, he took actual films of people making objects and tools. Now, by today's standards, they're definitely not high definition quality. They were 8mm home movies, but importantly, they recorded craft skills. I mean, I mentioned recently his gimlet making. Sounds a terribly, in a sense, unusual object, but it's the little thing that makes holes that you, in a sense, has got a bit like a corkscrew on the end of it. But actually to see a craftsman, how they turn to create that screw in it, is incredibly interesting. And Ken took a very run-down workshop in Ecclesfield, somebody actually making a gimlet. Don't make them now, certainly not like that. And there are little gems like that. There's one of wooden block planes from the last wooden block plane maker in Sheffield, somebody called Albert Bock. Now there's a good Sheffield name for you, which was recorded him actually hand chiselling out the wooden blocks to actually create block planes from a building that's no longer there. It was Marple's factory, which is opposite the old Royal Hospital in Sheffield. I'm sure a lot of people in Sheffield remember certainly the Royal Hospital. They might not remember the Marple's building opposite it, but it was a film that was made again in the mid-1960s. The Hawley Collection is solely run by volunteers. We have no paid workers looking at it, although we're in a sense hosted within Kelham. All of our people who work here are volunteers, and we're always on the lookout for people who are interested in working with us. But we have about 25 of them, ranging a huge range of interests in there. And what they try to do is have a regular changing of a small exhibition area here. We've just taken the scissors exhibition out and replaced it with the handles one, and then there are plans probably in 3 or 4 months time for another topic. It both engages our volunteers, but also in a sense I think creates what we ought to have in the museum, is a changing series of exhibitions. It's not just about the permanent things that are always there, it's to try and illustrate more clearly what the actual collection in depth contains. And that again is a piece of Sheffield craft skill. It doesn't belong to the collection. It's on almost permanent loan from Stanley's, who the inheritors of the company that originally started that off. But again, it perhaps is a fine illustration, a bit like the Royal Sorrow I mentioned earlier on, of Sheffield craft skills at their best. And I think it's interesting that just around the corner, obviously from the Hawley Gallery, is Stan Shaw is still making penknives in his 90s, and in effect that is probably the pinnacle of what was made in Sheffield. That you never use it as a penknife, it's far too big to put in your pocket obviously, and far too many blades, but I think what it does illustrate is that history of craft skills, which I think is important for us to understand where the city's reputation today comes from. You know, we hear a lot about things like advanced manufacturing part, but that was established here on the back of the skills and knowledge that were inherent in Sheffield and the immediate region. And I think here is both tells the story about the past, but it also informs the future as well, about how in a sense we look at the collection.